Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Thanks for joining me at Cold Case Christianity. I'm J. Warner Wallace. This week we're going to talk about how you might respond to criticism or objections to Christianity. If you've just kind of wandered through and surfed through and discovered this show, then you might, for the first time, really be thinking seriously about how you might respond to those who don't believe what you believe. And I think our culture is changing, in the sense that, and you hear it described all the time, new atheist, you'll hear the new atheism. What does that really mean? Well, it's not new in the sense that it's offering any new objections or any new forms of objections. It's not as though there's anything new under the sun that hasn't been leveled against Christianity in the last 2,000 years. As a matter of fact, if you were to read the Church Fathers in the first 400 years defending the Christian worldview, you'll see they're, for the most part, defending many of the same things that people are talking about today or making a defense for today. So not much has changed in all this time, but what has changed is clearly the attitude that we're seeing from those who object to what we believe. And I think we're seeing a much more caustic, aggressive, cynical, biting kind of resistance to what it is we believe as Christians. And I think I saw it kind of peak, or begin at least in earnest, after the Twin Tower attacks in New York in 9/11. In 2001, within a year or two of that, a number of books appeared on the market, really making a case against theism, and pointing many times back to the actions of those folks who flew planes into those buildings as an example of where they thought theism could lead. And it's not just, these folks would say, it's not just that theism is silly, it's that theism is dangerous. And that those of you who believe that God exists do bad things to others who either don't agree with your beliefs, or you might do things in the name of your God that other people would find offensive or dangerous. So the question then becomes, well, is that really true? And the level of discourse is much more pejorative. I mean, you'll see that people will really, and if for example, if you've engaged people online, on your Facebook page or in Reddit or wherever it may be, you're talking to people online, you know that those conversations related to whether God exists or not, related to Christianity, can become very, very hostile in short order. And the kind of the discourse that we hear from those who disagree with us is more vigorous, more heated, and in many ways less friendly and polite, for sure. Would you at least agree with that? That's really the case. That's what we face today. And then the question, of course, is how do we then, as Christians, best respond to those who object to us? Well, there's a couple of overarching principles I'd like to share with you on the show today. And then a friend of mine, Greg Kokel, wrote a book called Tactics that really talks in detail about how you might specifically respond when asked tough questions or when a charge is leveled at you. But before we even get to that point, I'd like to talk about a couple of foundational issues. The first foundational issue is that I often see that Christians are shocked in some way or surprised in some way that anybody would offer an objection or could offer an articulate, detailed, robust objection to Christianity. It's almost as though some of us haven't really studied what we believe well enough to know what the other side believes, to know what the other side claims. So we're not then prepared. Number one, we're shocked when we hear there is another side to the story. And that's one of the things as a youth pastor that was very, very important to me when I was raising up my students, is that I wanted to make sure that whatever objection they heard related to Christianity, they would hear it from me first as their pastor, rather than hear it for the first time once they're in college, the year they graduate from our youth ministry. I wanted them to hear every objection the way I would have thrown it at them as an atheist, the way that I first thought about these things as an atheist, and with the kind of vigor that they would see in the culture when they finally got to college. I wanted them to see the objection in that format, because that's what they're actually going to have to deal with down the road. By the way, if you're my age, I'm in my 50s now, okay? If you're an adult who's already been kind of situated in your career, in your family life, your social life, there's a good chance you've surrounded yourself with people who are like-minded. Or at least you've found a way to coexist in your environment without ever raising these questions, without ever having anybody encounter you or contact you to make an objection to what you believe anyway. We have a tendency to surround ourselves with friends who are like us. We do those social things with friends who we care about, who help us hold our beliefs. And if we're working in a work environment, we often find a way to insulate ourselves and put ourselves in a little pocket of the company where our worldview is not even being observed, or no one even cares, or we've got a few other coworkers who believe what we believe anyway. My point is, as older adults, we typically find a way to create a life for ourselves in which we aren't challenged. So a lot of times when I talk to other up-and-coming case makers, Christian case makers, I say, the audience we ought to be trying to reach probably isn't my age. Because we've probably, I don't, a lot of folks I talk to who are my age don't even know what the other side is saying. But young people from 18 to 25, 18 to 30, well, they're in the university years. And in that setting, they cannot always control who their friends are. They cannot always control the worldview or put themselves in a place where they're insulated. They're going to find themselves face-to-face confronted for the first time with a worldview very different than their own. And those are the folks in that 18 to 30 range that really need to know what is true, and how do I defend what is true? And what are the ways I would even respond to these kinds of objections? Because those are the folks who haven't built for themselves a comfortable life insulated from objections. They're going to hear everything. If you're somebody who's interested in making the case for Christianity, I want to encourage you. Sometimes people will write to me and say, well, how do I get involved in this? How do I do what you're doing? How do I'm working in this profession. I'd like to be a professional Christian case maker. Well, I don't know very many of those, and I'm not one of those either. I'm a cold case detective who happens to make a case for Christianity. And I made a living as a cold case detective, not as a Christian apologist. As a matter of fact, I still make a living as a cold case detective. That's where 90% of my income comes from. So I can tell you that all of us out there have the opportunity to make the case for Christianity. Even if we're not going to make it for a living, you can make it. And I want to encourage you, if you're interested in this kind of thing, that you're probably involved in a church right now that has a youth group or has young people in that church. That's the group I would encourage you to get involved with, because those are the folks who really need to hear the case for Christianity and also know how to respond to the robust objections. Now, I'm going to take a break for a second, but when I come back, I want to talk about my experience with defense attorneys, because I think it's helped me to navigate objections to begin with, because no one offers more objections than defense attorneys in criminal trials. So I want to share with you what I've learned, because I think it'll help you become a better Christian case maker and learn how to respond to those kinds of objections along the way. We'll do that right after the break.
In addition to Jim's daily blog and weekly podcasts and videos, Jim continues to write books designed to help you become a better Christian case maker. At coldcasechristianity.com, you'll find a link to Cold Case Christianity, a homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels, and Alive, a cold case approach to the resurrection. These resources will help you defend what you believe and share it with others.
Okay, in all the years that I've worked criminal investigations and sat in, I can't tell you how many trials over the years, murder trials, robbery trials, burglary trials, I've come to know a lot of defense attorneys, and I've got a chance to see how they communicate their case to a jury. And I've learned some things about how they communicate a case and the nature of their objections. And I wanted to start this discussion broadly about how to respond to objections of critics, just by noting three things about defense attorneys that I've observed. And that's that all defense attorneys are true believers of one nature or another. Some truly believe their defendant, their client, is innocent. And you might think, well, don't all of them believe that? Well, let me finish this. Some definitely believe that their defendant, their client, is innocent. And they would do anything to, and I've worked a number of cases where this was in fact the case, that where a defense attorney actually believed that the reason that we're seeing it wrong, we've got the evidence wrong, his guy could not have done it. I actually had a case recently in the last 2 years where that was the case for a defense attorney, and he didn't change his mind about this until after the sentencing, when his client, our defendant in our case, actually confessed to the crime in front of the judge. And up to that point, his attorney was a true believer. He believed his client was innocent. But I think actually that's a smaller percentage than you might think in terms of defense attorneys who are defending their client. Some may not even ask the questions that would dig to the truth of it because they are true believers in a different sense. They're true believers in the value of our judicial system and the fact that our system requires that everyone get the best possible defense. And even if you've got somebody who you're not quite sure, and there's no way you could know, your client's not saying he's guilty, your client is maintaining his innocence, and even if you don't know for sure for yourself, you owe it as his defense attorney to give him the most robust, vigorous, well-reasoned defense you can possibly give him, or her, because that is the nature of our system. Only works if both sides are represented well. Look at it this way: if the defense of the defendant is not sufficient, then they're going to appeal this for inadequate defense and have the thing overturned down the road. We, on both sides, prosecutors and defense attorneys, we want both sides to be the most vigorous and robust and well-reasoned they can possibly be, because that means that trial is going to go down and it's not going to have a problem on appeal. It's not going to have a problem looking forward in terms of its being second-guessed by anybody. The system works best when everyone gets the best possible defense. And there are defense attorneys out there who won't even probe deeply into whether or not if their guy says he didn't do it, that's good enough for me. What really concerns me is that he gets his adequate defense, because that's my job as part of the larger system that ensures justice for everyone. So there may not be true believers in that their client is innocent. They may simply be true believers in the system and their role in the system. That's, I think, if you ask me, my observation is that's the by far largest category of people working in this field. It doesn't matter whether my guy is innocent or not. He is not obviously telling me that he did it, but it's not my role is to make sure I give him the best defense possible. That's my role. The third kind of true believer I always cite is, and there are some of these, let's be honest. I mean, we'd be a fool not to think otherwise. There are people who are in it, they're true believers in the money. And they're true believers in clients that can afford to pay them well, and they'll defend these clients. They don't care whether the system works or not. They don't care whether he's guilty or not. What they really care about is, how much are you paying me again? Now, I think it's a very, 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 very small percentage, if I'm honest with you. I think the vast majority fall in that second group. They are true believers in their role in the system. But there are these three groups that I have experienced out there. All of them are true believers, but they're true believers in something slightly different. Now, why I even offer this to you is because when I think about any of us who holds a position, I think we can fall in one of those three categories, couldn't we, even as Christians? Why do you believe this is true? There are some of us who I've said it here how many times on this show. I'm not a Christian because I was trying to solve a problem, or I was raised in a Christian family. I wasn't raised in a Christian family, and I didn't think I had a problem. I wasn't at the end of myself and a wreck and needed to be fixed. I didn't feel that way about my life. I also wasn't somebody who was afraid of hell or hoping for heaven. These were not the things that animated me. I became interested in Christianity based on its truth claims. And once I determined those truth claims were true, I didn't think I had a choice. I mean, it's a C.S. Lewis thing. He wrote this in God in the Dock, where he says, if false, Christianity is of no importance. If true, it's of infinite importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. And when I discovered it was true, I was in. I'm a Christian today, not because it works for me or for any of those other reasons I mentioned. I'm a Christian today because it's true. I'm in that percentage of true believers who believes they're like some of the defense attorneys I've known who actually believe their client is innocent based on the evidence. And there are folks, by the way, who win because their client actually is innocent based on the evidence. Now, I'll tell you, that hasn't been my situation, but I often will get called by people who will ask me to work a case because their client is innocent and they want someone to kind of weigh in on it. That's the first category. But there's also folks who will hold to this position because they have something else that's motivating them, and they are a true believer in that something else. Maybe it's, maybe on the Christian side, it could be argued from an atheist perspective, well, aren't you just a Christian because it works in your family? Aren't you just a believer in whatever you're a believer in because your family raised you that way and you don't want to make waves with your family and have your family upset with you, so you stay in the system even though it's not true? Couldn't that be argued? I would argue from the other side, well, aren't you, perhaps what's animating you is this resistance to anything that would call you to behave in a way that you didn't want to behave. Sometimes people hold a view not because they don't think it's true, or they even examine the evidence about Christianity. They don't want Christianity to be true. They don't want there to be a God like that would judge their behavior. They don't want, this animates some people. Now, I'm not to say it animates all, but it does animate some. So I think we have to really start when we hear objections to what we believe. Number one, don't be surprised that somebody can make a robust objection. I see this all the time in criminal trials where we present our case for 6 weeks and they present their case for 5 weeks. Really? We have the truth. This guy's going to get convicted, and he does get convicted. But before he gets convicted, the other side presents a robust, thorough, articulate, detailed, objective defense where they're going to argue, they're going to object to what we've offered, and they're going to argue for an opposite view. And they're offering this opposite view with expert witnesses, and they'll call certain evidences into play. It turns out, though, they don't have the truth. But they're able to articulate a robust defense even though they don't hold the truth. So what I want to offer to you is don't be surprised. Please don't be surprised when people are able to offer an articulate, robust, detailed defense. It doesn't mean they have the truth, because you can offer a robust defense and not actually have the truth. That also would apply to us, okay, to be fair. So we have to evaluate the case. But what I don't want young people, young Christians, to get kind of shook up or put off by the fact that the other side can make a case. Yes, that's truly possible even when you don't have the truth. Now, when we come back, I'll offer you just a little more detailed structure on how you might respond to objections as you hear them as a Christian.
Be sure to visit the Cold Case Christianity website daily to read Jim's blog, watch the weekly video, or listen to the Cold Case Christianity podcast. You'll also find great free resources, including the free downloadable monthly Bible insert. While you're there, be sure to sign up for Jim's daily case note email. Cold Case Christianity is designed to help you become a better Christian casemaker.
Okay, in the next few minutes, I'm going to offer for you the most truncated, shortened, abbreviated version of a strategy that I could possibly do. I could have spent the entire day teaching this as a seminar, but instead we're going to do it in just a few minutes. So I'm going to point you to a resource. This is a book by my buddy Greg Koukl called Tactics, okay? And you can learn more about Greg's work at www.str.org. He also has a show here on NRB Network. And this is a great book. And he and I think a lot alike. And as a matter of fact, when he was teaching tactics years and years and years ago, that's when I was first drawn to his ministry, because I heard a lot of what I do in criminal trials seemed to be reflected in his approach. This is a book you need to get. As a matter of fact, if you go on Amazon, I noticed that when you buy my book, Cold Case Christianity, the book that is offered along with it is this book, bought by more people buy these in a pair in unison than any other pairing. Also, another book, which you're probably familiar with because there's another show here on NRB Network called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist from Frank Turk and Norm Geisler. That book is the third book. These three books almost are always bought together. And I think it's actually, I'm proud to be part of that trio because I think a lot of what Greg says in that book is extremely valuable. First things first. If what you hold is true, there is no reason for you to become rabid about it. There's no reason for you to get defensive. I try to be very dispassionate in my conversations. When I work a case, do I really care that that guy's the guy who's guilty? I don't care. I'm not trying to convict that guy. It's not because I don't like the way he looks, or I don't like his name, or I don't like that. That has nothing to do. I don't really care who's guilty in my cases. I just care what does the evidence point to? What does the evidence indicate? Who is the best inference from evidence as the suspect? That's the only guy I'm concerned about. But I have no horse in this race. I have no bone to pick with any of these folks. There's not one guy I'm trying to get. I'm just going to show you where the evidence points, and that's who did it. I'm not passionate about it, or it's just the way it is. This is who committed the murder. That's really the same approach I take with Christianity. I'm not going to get defensive about it. I've examined the evidence. I think I've looked at everything on both sides in depth. And having looked at everything on both sides, I'm not going to be surprised. There's nothing out there that's going to surprise me. And number two, I just think that dispassionately that the best inference from evidence points in our direction. And I'm not here to beat my chest about it or to mock anybody about it or to get offended. I'm not offended if you take a different position than me. I have a very neutral position on this. This is where I believe the evidence points, and that's it. So I typically, if someone says something that has an inflamed response, either at a talk I'm giving on a college campus or online in response to something I've written, I don't get upset about it. I feel like, okay, that's on him or her who wants to. I'm not here to try to mock people of the other view. I'm not here to mock a defense attorney in a criminal trial. Here are the facts, and this is what they demonstrate. And typically when I'm involved in a conversation, I've been on it for years, even before I was aware of Greg Koukl's Tactics book, I want to ask good questions. And most of my exchanges in conversations with people who are offering something that is opposing my view is simply in the form of questions. Now, maybe a lot of that's just my own background as a detective, right? But Greg will teach you in this book how to ask the right questions. And the first question is a what question. The questions are typically what, when, why, where, how. These are all the kinds of questions we always ask, right? And you want to ask all those questions to get the most robust picture of any situation, any investigation you're going to work. But that first question, what do you mean? So when someone offers levels an attack or levels an objection at you, you want to clarify what it is that person is offering to begin with. So you want to ask those kinds of questions. What do you mean by that? That question, what do you mean by that, goes a long way. I've had conversations that lasted an hour where we never got past that first question because when they responded to that first question, they gave me another answer that needed clarification. So I'd ask, well, what do you mean by that? And we kind of go back and back and back. If someone says, I don't believe that Jesus ever lived because he's so similar to other mythologies, we've done a show here at Cold Case Christianity about those similarities, you're going to want to ask, well, what do you mean by similar? How is he similar? What do you mean by he's similar to other ancient deities? Well, they were all were born of a virgin. Really? Well, okay. So what can you tell me? What are the other deities that were born of a virgin? Oh, well, Horus was born of a virgin. Well, can you tell me what the story of Horus? I'm not really familiar with it. How is it he is born of a virgin? Asking these what questions are helpful because in the end you're going to discover that most people have offered an objection they heard in very brief form in some other setting. They haven't mastered the objection for themselves. They haven't even looked carefully at the evidence upon which the objection is based. And when you ask good what questions, you're going to find, number one, what is the real objection? And number two, is this objection really based, at least in this person talking to me, is it really based on any evidence that he's examined? Or is he just kind of repeating an objection that somebody else? If nothing else, your what questions are going to demonstrate for the person you're talking to the limit of their own knowledge. And then we can be sober about, well, what do I really know about this issue to begin with? Maybe I need to look at it a little more deeply. Because it turns out, for example, on that one issue, if you ask enough what questions, you're going to find out that Horus's birth in that mythology is very, very different than Jesus. And to even stretch the two to some form of similarity is preposterous. But you wouldn't know that if you don't ask the what do you mean by that question. The second kind of question we typically ask is, well, why do you believe that's true? And that also will help you clarify the source of what that information is. And I think why questions are important too, because even for example, you're asking, well, what do you mean by that? And two, why? Or how did you get to that point? Or what information, what sources did you use to determine that truth? You want to ask those two questions. And you can ask those questions, by the way, for a long period of time without ever having to offer anything affirmative on your side. It's a very basic principle that Greg talks about that we also know in criminal trials. The person who makes the point, makes the assertion, that's the person who has the burden of proof for supporting their own assertion. If someone makes an assertion and says, this is what I believe about Jesus, I'm going to ask enough what and why questions so that he has to defend his position. There's no point in my making my case or making my position known. I'm going to wait and empty out all of his assertion first. And what and why questions will help you do that. They'll help you empty out everything that person holds in their head about that issue. And that's helpful to you. The third step in this for me, after asking the what do you mean by that and why do you think that's true questions, is to help to pick selective questions that will help them see the logical inconsistencies that you're going to notice when they start responding to the first two questions. I guarantee you this, if you're in this conversation for 30 minutes and you've asked a lot of what questions and why questions, you're going to see that folks are going to consistently make errors in their judgment. They're going to believe things for which they have no evidential support, for example. Oftentimes you'll have someone make an assertion, but when you push them to see where it comes from, they'll say, well, I got that off the internet, and I got this from somebody else. And that's when you're going to be able to ask a question like, well, do you think that everything you read on the internet is necessarily reliable? Or what kinds of books do you think you could find, or sources do you think you could find that actually could tell you much about that issue aside from the sources you're using? What you want to do is help people see the limits in their own knowledge and help them see how, if I looked at this a little bit more clearly, or if I have not held this bias, or if I had not held this presupposition, I might have seen it differently. You're looking for those areas in which somehow their logic is slightly flawed. And you want to be able to ask. Now, you could just call them out. Now, your logic's bad over there. You weren't thinking right. Da-da-da-da-da. Better to ask, well, if you went at it this way, do you think you'd come at a different approach? Ask it in question form. So I wish we had more time to talk about this in this episode, but I want you to a couple of things to take away before you leave. Number one, recognize that all of us are true believers in one form or another. They may not be true believers in the truth of their position. They may just be true believers in what their position allows them to do if they accept it. Try to learn what the differences are so you can know what it is you're dealing with when you're talking to somebody who holds an objection. No reason to panic. Number two, if you hold the truth. We do hold the truth. We don't need to become abrasive, overreactive, nasty. No reason to do any of that because we happen to hold the truth. Hold it neutrally. We're Christians because it's true. And that's good enough. And there's no horse in the race for us. We're just going to present the case as we know it. 3, ask really good questions. The what, the why question, and then those follow-up questions that open up and expose the logical inconsistencies in their thinking. By the way, you don't have to have an answer for every question that's asked of you. You don't have to. Jurors get to make a decision, but they don't have to retain it as expert witnesses. We bring expert witnesses that testify in front of jurors. Jurors are allowed to ask for readback of the expert witnesses. As you're discussing this case with other jurors in your midst, and you might be the lead juror, maybe you're going to lead the conversation, but you don't have to be an expert witness. You just have to have access to the expert witnesses. That's why I have books on this shelf. That's why you ought to have books on that shelf too. None of us has to be an expert in every field. We just have to know where to go to get the information. And I hope this is one of those places you can go to get some of that information as well. Until next week, I'll see you right back here at Cold Case Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels in the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity. A homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels. It's available wherever books are sold.